Sup guys, you know the drill. Today I'll be breaking down the Implacable event. First up is Implacable herself. Her kit is obviously centered around her second skill's slow, which is better than AVP's slow in pretty much every metric. But since she has such a powerful debuff, they held back a bit on her damage output. Her major damage skill is her skill 1, which might seem good at a glance, but the barrage damage is so bad that I'm still hoping it's a typo. I thought that Vanguard had a weak barrage for a UR ship, but it seems like she has set the new standard. Anyways, continuing on with the first skill, you can pretty much just ignore the stacks and assume that it will have all the effects every time. So this will mean the barrage always has 100% crit, so you can see it as the barrage having 330 base damage instead of 220, which doesn't do much to save it. To give a frame of reference to her damage, without accounting for the slow, her light and medium damage are lower than Albion's, but not by too much, and then her heavy damage is lower than Theseus, and obviously lower than Chkalov, and also lower than Arc Royal, assuming that her double damage procs 25% of the time. Her damage is also lower than AVP's against light and heavy cruisers because of the Hunter mod, and especially so against Siren enemies since AVP has Siren Killer. Now, this does not mean that AVP is necessarily better than her, because her slow is much easier to work with. But if you prefer AVP for aesthetic reasons, then you're not losing out on much, especially against cruisers. Overall, she's not competing against ships that are used only for their damage output, but more so ships like AVP, Formidable, and Arc Royal. Her usefulness scales off the enemy movement, so against someone like Arizona meta, where you don't need any slows at all to land all of your airstrikes, you'd be better off using damage carriers, like the other rainbow carriers and Chkalov. But against an enemy with annoying movement patterns, like Helena meta or Hiryu meta, she'll pretty much be the best in slot to guarantee all of your damage lands. A couple more notable things before we move on. She does give HMS Vanguard ships 15% evasion, which might allow you to get away with using Cheshire as a main tank to help your carriers preserve their concealment. In addition, her slow lasts a total of 6 seconds, so there's nothing stopping you from using her with battleships as well to support them with her slow. Oh, and one last thing I almost forgot to mention, she has a debuff for enemies' evasion stat, which is different from evasion rate, of course. Reducing an enemy's evasion stat by 20% will give you anywhere from 0% damage increase up to maybe about 8%, depending on the enemy's evasion stat. So it's pretty decent, but not the most impressive debuff. Next up, we have Royal Oak. She has a couple of damage buffs, as well as a pretty good barrage, and her output will depend on how often she gets hit. If she's able to proc her barrage every 10 seconds, then it's actually pretty good for a gold ship. But if she doesn't get hit much and it procs once every 20 seconds, then she's on the weaker side. Realistically, she'll be somewhere between there, so not too exciting overall. Next up is Scylla. She functions pretty much as an AA carry, and her AA stat is high enough that her skill 1 actually buffs the AA of Cheshire if you use them together, but that's probably overkill. She actually has a very strong all-out assault, which procs every 6 shots, as opposed to other ships with DD main guns, which usually take 10 shots to proc. So this is almost as good as having the DD perk of proccing your all-out assault in half the amount of shots. Unfortunately though, I think her role as a damage cruiser as well as an AA carry are both outdone by Sandy, but she does have a very minor buff for carriers as well. She's a decent ship, and her damage output might surprise you given how weak the other Dido class ships are, but in the grand scheme of things, she's pretty much outclassed by Sandy. Her design is my favorite though out of all the ships in this event. Next is Argus, who has some niche uses. Her cross-fleet buff is good, but it's not unique or anything, and then she also has EXP bonus for her own fleet, so she's somewhat useful in unconventional ways. And lastly, we have Hero. Moving on, we have the new plane, which is a special Firefly, and the only thing of note is that the spread of its bombs is lower than that of typical 1,000 pound bombs. So its hit rate is a little bit better, but you're still not going to use it for damage purposes. Over Tenrai or Sky Raider, obviously. It's decent for timing purposes, so you might as well pick it up because it's not difficult to get or anything, but nothing game changing. And that's about it for this update. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.